Okay, great. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Made Smarter Innovation Network webinar on new product development, brought to you by KTN in partnership with Innovate UK and UKRI. My name is Matthew Reeves. I'm a Knowledge Transfer Manager for Materials Chemistry and Formulation, with a keen interest in the digitalisation and automation of research, product development and manufacturing of chemical, material and formulated products. This webinar and networking event is part of a series of 12 and marks the halfway point in the series for this one. So I'll just begin by giving a little introduction to KTN and the Made Smarter Innovation Network before introducing today's speakers, who I'm sure you're very eager to hear from. So at KTN, we create the diverse connections that enable positive change. We are an organisation of roughly 200 sector experts, covering all fields and sectors where innovation plays an important role. And we work to build communities from academics, startups, SMEs, large corporates, industry bodies, investor groups and government agencies to facilitate the solving of complex technical as well as societal, environmental and business challenges. And one such community that we're bringing to you today is the Made Smarter Innovation Network, which is connecting manufacturers, product developers, technology providers, and the funding and finance ecosystem to facilitate the uptake of Industry 4 solutions in a range of sectors. So what exactly is the Made Smarter Innovation Network? Well, the Made Smarter part of it was a report that emerged in 2016-17, written by Jürgen Myers of Siemens and a team of industrialists who recommended the increased adoption of digital technologies in the UK manufacturing sectors. And so in order to facilitate this, they recommended there should be 4 strategic themes: adoption, innovation, leadership, and skills. The adoption activity saw a rollout of this programme into saw some UK investment in the Northwest pilot recently, funded in a 3-year programme, and this year we'll see a rollout of that to 3 other regions, the Northeast, Yorkshire and Humber and the West Mids. So within the innovation theme, where we're looking at today, there's another set of activities funded through the Made Smarter Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, which aims to meet the opportunity that we have in the UK to innovate our own Industry 4 solutions, develop them, prove them, and potentially even export them. So total funding available with this programme, which includes the business investment, is £300 million, which some of you may have already benefited from. Under the CR&D strand, there was a fast start competition about 18 months ago, a digital supply chain call last autumn, and a smart factory call will be coming out sometime this year, so watch out for that. There's also international funding for projects working across borders. There was £20 million for research centres that focus on lower technology readiness level projects. The Digital Accelerator strand saw a £1 million programme run by the Digital Catapult last year, and there will be more of these coming up. The innovation hubs have just been contracted, so keep an eye out for the business funding, which will be cascading down from these to get businesses to prove new solutions before being used in a real factory. So all really exciting. And so one of the things that you would want to do with multiple companies, academics and organizations innovating is to bring them together and allow them to interact in a coordinated fashion, which is what we're doing within this innovation network. And on the slide here, you can see that using KTN's extensive technology and sector knowledge, we will be running this programme for the next few years to support the Made Smarter ISCF. And again, as you can see from the slide, there's a whole range of people here to help you make the most of the programme. So moving on to today's content, we have a great panel of speakers lined up for you. First up, we have Julian Philpott, who's an automation manager at Domino UK. Julian is followed by Dale Charlton, Applications Director at Applied Scientific Technologies, Thirdly, we have Joe Young, Managing Director of Additive-X, who will be also joined by colleague Kevin Askew, Business Development Manager for the Q&A. And to round things off, we have Joe Palmer, Senior Design and Development Engineer at the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre. So after the speakers have given the presentations, there will be time for Q&A. So please use the chat function in Zoom to submit your questions with either question or Q at the beginning of it, so we can pick them out easily. And please do stick around afterwards for the networking session that Anita mentioned earlier, where you'll be able to meet the speakers and some of your fellow delegates. So without any further ado, I'd like to invite Julian to start sharing his screen, and when you're ready, you can take it away.
Yes, thank you, Matthew, and thank you everyone for tuning in today and the kind introduction. Yeah, I'm Julian Philpott. I'm Automation Manager at Domino Printing, and today I'm going to talk you through a little bit about how we automate and digitize our new product development as part of this Made Smarter initiative. So we're going to cover off who Domino Printing are, and then why and how we're taking journeys to digitize our ink development and automate our ink development processes, and then how we think formulation will look like in the future. So Domino itself, we've been working for over 40 years, or established for over 40 years, developing and manufacturing high quality and high reliability industrial inkjet printers and inks. And that's so that our customers around the globe can code, mark and decorate their packaging or products. More specifically, ink development, we have a team of a very diverse and experienced team of 80 scientists and engineers who work hard to develop, test, scale up and introduce a large diverse ink range that's used around the globe in multiple applications. But today's about automation. So if we move on to automation, we have three key goals that we hang off our automation, which includes digitization. One is to increase productivity without compromising quality or scope. The second is to challenge research culture. So new systems, new processes, new kit all help drive innovation and keep people innovative in the research and development space. And then the third is to help in a commercial sense to move away from data frugal and heuristic decision making to data rich decision making, so that when choosing the right time to make critical decisions and making them with the right information at hand to do so. So we have a roadmap where we're transitioning from the short to medium term, I would say, and we follow three key themes. One is the equipment automation, one is development of our data, standardization and analytics, and the third is the big one, is the knowledge. The point of doing all of these things is to get out empirical data on complex designs all the way through to fully predictive systems based off the databases. So if it's not apparent already, I believe that data is the cornerstone to any sort of automation. If you can't handle and manage your data effectively, there's not much point generating lots of it. So that's where we started, and it is one of our main cornerstones. And at the time we started this work, we didn't find any external tools that we liked that really supported formulators. But there is a talk coming up next where if we were joining in 3 years later, we might have been working more closely with Dale. Anyway, so we developed our own suite of apps to support the planning and laboratory work of our chemists. And then the key thing again is that they all store to a secure, searchable and accessible central SQL database. And our database then links to the rest of the company too. So we have applications that enable users to store and view data, and that's around formulation, about recording measurement data. We have an inventory system as well. And then when we're planning and working with data, we support chemists with health and safety information to keep them safe, and compliance data to try to avoid some of those nasty surprises later on in projects. And we also produce some standardized reporting tools, which is a bit more nascent for us, but where the value really lies in standard reports coming out, but also some normal for people to use predictive tools in their day-to-day work. So we have all of that data. It makes sense to try and leverage it. So we use statistical design of experiments to answer specific multivariate problems. But we've also started a journey into machine learning to help us build some strong predictive models. What we do with all that data is we try to mine previous data and collate it with contemporary data, so we can start building some top-level observations and direct future developments, as well as helping the formulators in their development projects. And then as a nice aside, as a bonus, if you like, we produce metrics and we follow how work goes in the lab and how data is collected. And those metrics then help us follow laboratory and project behaviours, which then can inform how we improve those, either through automation or through management of the work. So that was a little bit about the digitization, and the next bit is a bit more about the automation hardware side. So when we started our hardware automation journey, we took the easy step first, which I would highly recommend, which was to get a fairly small system which did a crucial role. So viscosity, density, and conductivity are key properties when you're measuring and developing inks. So we bought an automated viscometer with a carousel system that allows us to do high throughput measurements. We combined it with an additional conductivity meter that uses the same flow system. And so in there, we can run 3 key measurements quite quickly, 24 hours a day. And it really does run most of those 24 hours a day. In the first 6 months, we ran over 7,000 samples, which was about 20,000 measurements made. We save 15 days of effort each month, and we continue to do so just with this small purchase. But what was really key here, yes, we've saved a lot of time in development, but what we actually did, what the crucial thing is that we drove engagement of formulators with the statistically designed experiment system. But we also opened their minds to other high throughput methods, so opened the door. So from that case study and a few other smaller projects, we then took a major step into high throughput formulation. So the deck you see here enables us to produce about 150 formulations per week, the equivalent of around 5 chemists, depending on 5 chemists on their average week in the labs. So we've massively increased the capacity for formulation. We thought when we first introduced it, it'd mostly be used at the screening stages of development, when you're really wanting to do a broad exploration of formulation space, because it makes relatively small samples. But what we've actually found is that we can use that all the way through the development cycle. And culturally, there's been a very strong uptake. It's both good and bad for me, because almost, well, 6 months after having it, we had a lot of people around the department requesting impedance matching, i.e. Everything in the labs could run at 48 samples per day, which is great, a great win for automation. It just means work doesn't ever get quiet. So a key thing there, I hope you've picked up, a key thread is actually about culture and developing an environment where automation can be accepted and is actually used and planned rather than enforced on people. So it does need changes in work patterns and thought processes. And it also requires the chemist's role to expand from an effective formulator to include some high throughput specialities. And we're seeing that that emerges through. If you get the culture right and you've got the right people, you can see this emergent specialities start appearing where people get interested and pick up and start leading things across the department. And to support that, we've embedded our formulation chemists in a collaborative and sort of cross-functional team. It also includes software developers, data analysts, and engineers who are very used to automated systems. So everyone's in there to help each other. So a little bit about what we then see using all of those systems and how we see the future of new product development. So we expect people to have the requests come in for a new design. We're going to look at previous data, large data sets that we have on all the raw materials at our disposal. We'll run the PCs and computers hard to do some in silico experimentation, but also make some predictive models. And then we use the robot to do, or robots to do some screening experiments across the board and to help us back up the predictions that were made. All of that relies on having strong data, trustworthy data. And then as you go through the development process, you keep your reliance on automation to give you that high throughput data, always feeding data in, always feeding information back out from your models, so that you can go all the way to scaling up and commercializing your finalized ink. What does that mean? Well, hopefully either we speed up the process or we give chemists more time. We've got some very keen and very capable chemists and formulators. So it's great to be able to give them more and more time to deal with novel chemistries, new materials, and allow them really to explore novel applications. So we see the future being a collaboration between multidisciplinary teams, as well as between computers and robots. And that means that chemists can spend more time designing, thinking, and exploring rather than doing in the lab. And everything, as we've already seen, things become more creative, and we develop a nicer place for people to work. It's quite exciting to be part of a place where people have time to think, even though there's lots of project pressures on. So I think I should sum up there. So in brief, automation is and has been an effective way for us to increase our productivity without compromising quality. We've taken some major steps, but there's some more to go. But already we've shown a cultural shift, a change in how our labs look, and we've demonstrated some savings and benefits. We do see opportunities to fully automate all of our own development pipeline, and there's some significant benefits across the board to working with data, and we're looking to unlock that more and more as we go forward. So I'd like to end up with, or finish up with a great big thank you both to the organisers here today. I think they're great events, but also to everyone at Domino who's been involved. Yes, this was a pre-pandemic photo before anyone gets nervous about social distancing, so it's not all the contemporary team is in there, but thank you to everyone at Domino who was involved. And then, yeah, welcome any questions in the chat, in the Q&A, or if you've got something burning specific, my email's at the bottom there.
That's great. Thanks very much, Julian. Really great stuff. It'll be really interesting to see how far you can take this. You know, you say you're trying to automate, you know, how autonomous you can really make the entire cycle. It'll be really interesting to see that in the future. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat box, and we'll get to them in the Q&A at the end. So thanks again, Julian. Next up, we have Dale Charlton from Applied Scientific Technologies. So if you'd like to start sharing your screen.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good to go.
First of all, thank you very much for KTN to allowing us to invite me to this talk, to this WebEx today. My name is Dale Charlton from the company Applied Scientific Technologies. For those of you who don't know us, so who are we? We're an innovative laboratory digitalization and robotics company based in North Yorkshire. We've been around for about 4 years, but we're actually a spin-out company from our sister company, Applied Integration, who are specialists in industrial automation. And we use that sort of knowledge and those experiences in the laboratory space. And the principle is that we innovate new products in the laboratory around the Lab 4.40, Internet of Lab Things, and generally the Lab of the Future landscapes. We focus specifically in and around the materials science industries, and specifically in the R&D and formulation laboratories. And the idea is really to try to democratize access to the digital space and to focus on practical everyday tools that lab scientists can use at the bench. We have the sort of the phrase from paints to pharma and from cosmetics to catalysts. So the technology is really applied across a wide range of products and applications. When we look at the laboratory digital revolution and just looking at the digital landscape, generally speaking, 78% of the world's population is digitally connected, usually through some form of smart device, phone, tablets, PCs. Most of us have grown up with transformation digital services, particularly the mobile phone revolution. Most of us have a mobile phone, a smartphone. But what about the laboratories? Generally speaking, there's been a number of systems available, things like informatics, bioinformatics systems, LIMS, and electronic lab notebooks. But generally speaking, around the sort of bench level equipment, interconnectivity, there is still some way to go. And we think that Laboratory 4.0, the Internet of Lab Things, AI, big data, all of this is coming, and it's looking to accelerate development in these areas. And from our experience, even today, perhaps the most ubiquitous digital tool in the laboratory is the USB stick. Certainly we work in laboratories, very small laboratories, maybe a brewery, microbiology laboratory doing bioburden or food spoilage type microbiology, right up to big enterprise corporations, pharmaceutical companies, big chemical companies. And we still find that the USB stick is still widely used. So if we come into the main sort of premise of the talk, an introduction to DEFT. DEFT is a product. It's both hardware and software, and we call it the Digital Enabled Formulation Tool Set. And we have the sort of phrase, your workflow, your instruments made digital. It essentially does what it says on the tin. If I describe the system to you, this is a schematic. We have a number of lab instruments, in this case up to 4 instruments. They can range from common laboratory instruments, stirrers, hot plate stirrer shakers, conductivity pH meters, balancers, and a wide range of other instruments such as pumps, syringe pumps, pipetters, and that we communicate and we control those instruments via a Wi-Fi network. In this case, it's Bluetooth, so we send command strings to the instruments and receive information data from the instruments via Bluetooth. These are connected to a DEFT gateway. The DEFT gateway has obviously got Bluetooth, so it's communicating to the lab instruments. It also has Wi-Fi capability, and that Wi-Fi capability allows it to communicate and connect to a site manager, or a data site manager as we call it, and in turn can connect to the host network, perhaps a LIMS, and with permissions to the wider cloud outside the facility. All of that is controlled via an app, which sits on a tablet or a mobile phone. And that's connected to the gateway, again, via Wi-Fi. So that's the system architecture, but what does it look like in real life? So this is it in real life. What I've got here is a number of instruments. There are 3 lab instruments, and then I've got the network hardware and software for the actual DEFT product itself. So the top left-hand side, we have what we call an ID tag. And this ID tag fits into the back of the instrument. The instrument needs to have some form of communications port, RS-232, 438, Ethernet, whatever. And that really is the tool that converts the command strings for the instrument into Bluetooth protocol. So we have an ID tag associated with each instrument. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the ICA Eurostar 60. Any of the ICA Eurostar products are already connected. In this case, it's got a temperature probe as well as a stirrer, so we can control the stirrer speed, and we can control how long that might go for. And then we can observe temperature and record temperature at the same time. There's a balance, there's a no-house balance. The ID tag is hidden behind the balance. It's about the size of a matchbox. And the idea is that we try to remove cables. You'll notice that most of the cables are removed because we're essentially a wireless system. In the middle of the screen, just slightly to the right, is the Integra Biosciences ViaFlow handheld pipette. This is an electronic pipette, and some of the newer laboratory instruments are actually Wi-Fi and Bluetooth enabled. This particular pipette is Bluetooth enabled, and we can use that for control purposes. To the right of that, we have our site data manager. There is normally just one of those on site with a router, standard looking firewall router. And then the black box, the white box in front of that is the DEFT itself. The DEFT is made of corin, so it can sit on a laboratory bench, but because it's wireless, you could also put it on a shelf out of the way. So you can see that it's we're trying to move cables as much as possible. You can get quite a neat installation. The instruments themselves, because they have an ID tag, we simply take the tablet and use the phone on the tablet, and we can scan the ID tag like a QR code, and that immediately identifies the instrument and puts the instrument into the DEFT for use. The DEFT app itself provides the main interface for DEFT functions. It handles all the user login, and we can log in via our own site data manager with our own database, or we can do that through the host laboratory LIMS system or electronic lab notebook system, for example. It enables control of connected devices. It allows you to create new formulations. The actual app itself is available on a number of different platforms. Principally, we use Android and iOS, but Linux and Microsoft is also available by the end of the year. And all the information that is collected, that is used, is obviously electronic, it's digital. So we generate two files, an audit log file and a data log file. We can combine these in some instances for customers. The audit log really collects all the auditable data, who used the equipment, where, when, what instruments were used for that experiment, what the experiment name was, or what information came down from the LIMS system, any stoppages, any notes that were made during the experiment, if the experiment was stopped at all of that information is collected within the audit log. And then, of course, all the analytical data from the instruments themselves are collected in the data log. The actual DEFT system itself, that really gives you a sort of an overview of what the DEFT system looks like and what it's able to do. There's a number of other features on the system itself, perhaps too few to mention here within the time frame, and I would guide you to the website, Applied Scientific or appliedst.co.uk. But principally, we can connect 1, 2, or 4 instruments. It's scalable, so we can connect up to 50 gateways to a single site data manager and approximately 200 instruments. We use a common industry standards off the shelf, wireless, Bluetooth, cloud connectivity. One specific feature about the system is we use SEALA, 2 rapid integration protocols. And if people are unfamiliar with that, SEALA stands for Standards in Laboratory Automation. It's a non-profit organization based in Constance in Switzerland. And its aim really is to try to democratize laboratory automation by developing open source connectivity that allow you to control a wide variety of laboratory instruments. DEFT is controlled from a tablet phone app, and pretty much as long as it's got a comms port, we can handle most legacy instruments. And the new crop of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth enabled laboratory instruments following the Internet of Laboratory Things environment, and they're pretty much plug and play. They've got an ID and a QR code, and if you want to add them to the network, you just simply scan the barcode If you want to take them off the network, you just simply click a button and it takes them off the network, and then you can put another instrument onto it. And the principle is everything is captured digitally. It allows full reporting. Because we're capturing everything, reproducibility and in principle productivity should increase. Whilst you're running an experiment, you can view it online. It's live. And we also, with enterprise-wide asset management, we can check to see if instruments were used, when they were used, how long they were used for. So we've got tools in the system to be able to manage your assets and make best use of them. And if there's a broken instrument, we can also identify that and mark it for repair or replacement. And so with that, I can close. If you've got any questions, happy to answer them. And if you've got, I want more information, then please go to the website, Dale Charlton, applied.st.co.uk. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dale. Great stuff. I wish I'd had something like this during my PhD. It would have made my life much easier.
Me too.
But yeah, thanks again. So just in the interest of time, we'll move on to our next speaker. Any questions for Dale, please put them in the chat box and we'll get to them very soon. So our third speaker is Joe Young of Additive-X. Over to you, Joe.
Hi, welcome everybody. So I'm Jo, Managing Director of Additive-X, and I'm going to encourage you all to embrace additive manufacturing as a tool for new product development. You can save time, you can save money, help the creative process, discover new freedoms, and it's more accessible technology than you would think. It's easier to go beyond prototyping to 3D printing tools, jigs, fixtures, and even to use it for production, again, than you might think. So I've got 7 top tips for you for your additive manufacturing journey. And I'll start by talking about us. So Additive-X was Express Group. We're a 33-year-old Yorkshire-based SME, and we started as a printer repair company. We evolved to spare parts distributor because we needed the spare parts to do the repairs. And we were very successful, UK and in Europe. And then as our market was declining, we were looking for new directions. We had engineering skills. We were known as the desktop printer specialists in the 2D world. And in 2013, we took our first steps into 3D printing, into the world of desktop 3D printers. The blue printer in the middle was one of our first. Very simple design. It's a filament printer and it had a single material, which was ABS. It was a great printer at the time, and we did actually add it to our range, and we sold it to, especially to schools and colleges. But how we started was we started 3D printing parts for our 2D printer repairs. Broken bits that weren't available from the manufacturers, for example. And we just used free online 3D CAD software because we didn't have any particular in-house skills. And we were soon printing parts like the ones shown in blue. The process was actually easier than we thought, and the benefits were immediately clear. So the blue part, 4 pence worth of material versus what it would have cost to replace the whole unit, because the blue bit was not available to buy from HP, and so it was unrepairable. So my first tip is start with easy parts while you learn your printer's capability. Next, just another part similar, 38 pence worth of a black filament versus the cost to replace the module. And it took less time than you would think to measure, mock up the item in the free CAD software, also to tweak it and to print a new version. So we were able to improve the original designs with different iterations so that people wouldn't break things so easily when they were using their desktop printers. But top tip number 2, you are going to need to grow your in-house 3D CAD skills and gradually get used to designing for additive manufacturing. So there we were, running a 3D printing division at the time called GoPrint 3D, alongside our legacy parts business. Our intention was never to be like a box shifter. We wanted to consult, advise and support. That started with having the right product portfolio. So we wanted to have a wide range. We wanted best in class arranging pricing, and we wanted to be able to be open and honest with customers about return on investment and suitability. We've moved, initially we were pretty much in the education sector. It was our first target market, and 7 years later we do still supply universities all over the UK, but we've also moved into other sectors, and the requirements are very different. The education sector in particular has widely adopted additive manufacturing. Print City at MMU really stand out. They drive adoption of digitalisation through the MSc course that they run. And so they're bridging the skills gap really between the employers and in industry and what we need for the future. This facility is for students across all faculties. It also acts as an SME demonstrator. So it's bringing together disciplines in a way that's highly effective for innovation in areas including applications for AM. We've worked with them in partnership for a few years now, which has included having one of our team members based out of Print City and collaborating using our relationships with the manufacturers of the printers so that they can engage with them and find innovative ways to work. Just to show you how one thing that does happen, so Fabricon Design Limited had an intern from Print City who was on the course. He used what he knew about additive manufacturing to review some of their processes, and he was able to implement it and was then offered a permanent position at the company. This is just a part that they produced from photo to the part actually being printed within an hour. My top tip number 3 is hire a student, get somebody in, even if it is for an internship, and they can bring the new ideas with them. This Gartner hype cycle illustrates what can go wrong in a customer's journey with additive manufacturing. So a lot of people do buy a 3D printer, initially think it's brilliant. They do get some quick wins, maybe make some prototypes in-house that were previously done by a bureau, save some money, reduce some time, but then it won't do everything they need. And they've probably got more questions about materials. Sometimes they're making parts that are breaking, and we just want to say, don't give up. Get some more advice. We like to help customers along the whole journey. And sometimes if they're buying multiple technologies of printers, then we would take them back to the beginning of the journey with their new technology and try and help them find their killer application so they can reach their plateau of productivity. A customer like Applied Scientific, so they were a customer of ours a couple of years ago. My business development manager went to visit them. They actually had a different journey because they had a member of their team who'd already used 2 of the brands in our range. So much easier to work with them. So another customer, replacing legacy parts can be an obvious application for the technology, and helps prove the concept of additive manufacturing, perhaps for across the production line. This was a legacy part from a 30-year-old packaging machine. It'd been repaired multiple times, as you can see on the picture, with some welding. It was a metal part, which we then redesigned. So the black is a nylon with a chopped carbon fibre composite, and it's very strong, but it's also very light. It's lasted longer. And they were able to use like a digital inventory. So they would install a part and then have one maybe on the shelf ready to go and print another one. It prevented and minimised downtime, which would have cost £5,000 a day. Another company, so a confectionery company, came to us with the red metal cast part. And again, using the same black material as before, we were able to redesign the part which had enough strength but was much lighter. This composite part didn't need to be oiled or greased, and oil or grease was a bit of a problem with the previous part because it risked contamination in the production line, it being a confectionery company. But because it was lighter, it actually extended the life, the maintenance cycle of the equipment. So again, saving them money. And also they also had the concept of the digital inventory. They only needed to have maybe one part that they could then use and 3D print the replacement that was needed the next time. Lush are a really good example of a customer who's been on a journey. This comes from the Formlabs User Summit. They bought their first 3D printer from us, their first Formlabs printer in 2016, and they went up to 11 printers. They print all day and night on R&D projects. They produce molds for vacuum forming and stencils, and they created their innovation lab in 2018. They love this printer, not just because it's hardware that's easy to use, but also the software that controls the print jobs and the software that controls their fleet of printers. This part shown was an actual mold for a soap product, like a love token, which previously took 2 days labour to model and now takes 15 minutes press print, and the dots were unachievable on the hand modelling. So where we are, it's already not just for prototyping. So this is a survey done by one of our brands in 2020, which shows prototyping usage, tools and fixtures usage, end-use parts usage, perhaps is the one that surprises people at 40%, and also usage for maintenance. Where we are with the technology is the ability to iterate fast, the design freedom, high strength parts, so often people are able to replace metal with another material, but then there's also many other material properties. We've got 100+ in our range, including biocompatible and different metals. The prints are so accurate, reliable and repeatable, and the printing can be done via the cloud from anywhere in the world. So there are always more applications. Some people have maybe started with prototyping, but there's much more that they could explore. Software is rapidly becoming the differentiator between the printers. Some brands are doing it really well. They have a full ecosystem, which is running the printers, managing the fleets remotely. Where manufacturers may be on their 5th or 6th generation machines and they're printing consistently and printing reliably, they're introducing more and more materials, and then the future holds software innovation. Likely to be integrating perhaps with the inventory planning software in the future, and already starting to use machine learning to improve the accuracy of prints over time. There's so many examples. I think it's the best way to get inspiration. So anybody email me, I can send you a PDF of this report, which is literally 100 real manufacturers with what they've 3D printed and why, to inspire you beyond prototyping. Find out who in your business knows additive or 3D printing, or someone who's excited about it. Remember the top 7 tips and basically get started. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jo. Yeah, it's great to see the wide range of things that 3D printing can actually be used for, and I'm sure they'll be getting used more in the future. So thanks again. Our final speaker is Jo Palmer from the AMRC. So over to you, Jo.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my screen. Are you able to see that, Matthew?
Yep, good to go.
Fantastic. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining this session. My name's Jo Palmer. I'm from the AMRC, and I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about some of the new product development that we've been doing at the AMRC. So in terms of my role, I'm a senior design and development engineer, and as I mentioned, I work for the AMRC, which is actually part of the University of Sheffield. The MRC was established in 2001, so 20 years ago now, and actually occupies its own campus between Sheffield and Rotherham in Catcliffe. And initially started as a way to provide assistance and research to industrial partners on matters related to machining and subtractive manufacture. Over the last 20 years, we've grown considerably, and we now have various different research groups with different specialisms. So we have the original machining groups, we have separate groups looking at composites, other groups looking at castings, our integrated manufacturing group looking at automation and robotics and digital. And we've recently started delivering training and apprenticeship courses at the AMRC Training Centre. The building in which I work and the group in which I work is the design and prototyping group, which you can see on the bottom left corner of that particular image. It is actually one of the newer groups within the AMRC. The design and prototyping group was set up to deliver high-value design solutions to engineering problems, and this was typically for industrial partners and research collaborators. And as you'll see in a minute, we have, or we tend to get a very wide range of different projects. It's, you know, it's quite amazing, some of the variety that we get in terms of these projects. And for us, it's important that we maintain a very high quality output, regardless of the specifics of that project. And I think one of the ways in which we consistently achieve this is by the implementation of a stage gate process. So we have an initiation phase where we look at developing a specification together with the customer, determining what is acceptable and what is not acceptable for the solutions that they're seeking. One way in which we might differ from other development processes is that we actually have a very long and involved concept phase. So here we will look to develop as many or come up with as many different concepts as possible, which might meet the requirements of that particular specification. Moving on from that, we down select those concepts to a couple of front runners, which we then take through to detailed design. So here we'll be using standard tools such as computer-aided design, CAM, and analysis in order to develop detailed models of these concepts. And then moving on from that, we have a validation phase. So we'll be validating that our designs work either through software analysis or the construction and testing of physical prototypes. And this particular process has served us very well. And what I'd like to present to you today is probably 3 examples, a small, a medium, and a large type project that we delivered over the past couple of years, and just talk about some of the technologies that we've implemented in order to do that. So starting with perhaps one of the smaller projects, this was a project for William Whiteley and Sons. So some of you might know, Sheffield has a very long and illustrious history with steel and tool making. William Whiteley and Sons is actually the oldest documented scissor and shear manufacturer in the Western world. So they've been making scissors for a very long time. They know what they're doing, and they have a very high quality product and an expectation from their users that their product is very high quality. AMRC were approached by 2 directors, Jeremy and Sally, from William Whiteley's, in order to develop their new EXO scissor, or to assist them with developing their new EXO scissor. They had some ideas about what they wanted this particular scissor to look like, and we were assisting with perhaps the development stage of that particular product. So touching on some of the themes that Joe was talking about earlier, initially we went through a digitization phase, so looking at the concepts and ideas that they themselves had generated, creating CAD models for those, and then going through to prototype those models using our Pharma Form 2 SLA resin printers. As you can imagine, getting the ergonomics correct for this type of scissor is incredibly important. If this product does not feel good in the hand, is not comfortable to use, there's an implication that the quality is not high, and that ultimately the user is not going to come back and buy that product again. So there's a real need to get the ergonomics right, and one of the best ways to do that is through iterative prototyping of the handle geometry, and that's exactly what we did here. So we worked to refine the design, improve the ergonomics, and ultimately present the customer with several options for what they believed was the best quality of design. And essentially what this allowed us to do, or what it allowed the customer to do rather, was shortcut the development phase and proceed direct to the manufacture and ordering of hard tooling for this new product. And they could do that safe in the knowledge of knowing that the design was going to be, you know, of a high quality, have the correct ergonomics, and is going to be exactly what they want, and there wouldn't be, you know, wasted money and wasted time in developing that tooling. And, you know, just as a bit of an impact from the customer on that one, so Jeremy Ward, the director, said that the assistance of the AMRC had been vital to help us realise the perfect design and ergonomics of these new scissors. So, you know, they were quite happy with the input, and I believe that product is either finishing development now or will be on the market soon. Moving on to a different project and probably a medium size project. The mini tank project was a collaboration between AMRC and AVS, or Added Value Solutions, which is a global SME technology company. And this project was focused on the redesign of a propellant storage tank for nanosatellite applications. So the overarching goals of this project were to develop a propellant storage tank which held as much fuel as possible, which weighed as little as possible. Because obviously every gram that you can save in space applications is, has potentially massive cost implications when it comes to launching these things. So again, the team leveraged some of our AM capability, additive manufacture capability, to iterate through designs. This time they were using this in conjunction with a topology optimization type technology, so using computer algorithms and AI to inform the design of internal support structures. And what this allowed them to do was basically develop a square tank which maximized the use of space within the particular design envelope, which incorporated an internal support structure which spread the stress evenly across the entire structure, meaning that we got a very high level performance of that tank when it was under pressure. And then moving on for this, there was a design for manufacture stage, and actually the manufacturing technology which was selected in this particular application was a metal additive manufacturing technology, so a selective laser melting process. And that the final product is the one that you can see on screen at the moment. So looking at a quote from our engineer at the end of this project, we were able to achieve basically a 28% mass reduction compared to the original design, while simultaneously developing a fuel tank which held 2.8 times the fuel volume of a traditional design, which would have been able to fit into that same envelope. Excuse me. So some really, big numbers there in terms of mass reduction and capacity improvement. And all of that was facilitated, by several things, including the stage gate process, the initial polymer AM, and then the design for the metal AM at the end of the project. And then the last example is probably one of the biggest projects that we've tackled within the DPG. And this was for a mobility device. So in this particular project, we were approached by Corporal Phil Eaglesham of Conquering Horizons. And Conquering Horizons was a company specifically set up to produce an improved mobility device, which was superior to anything that was on the market at the minute. So as we'll see on the next slide, we went through, this was a reasonably long project. We went through several stages of prototyping and customer feedback before eventually settling on the design that you can see on screen here. This particular mobility device has some very nice features. It incorporates an electrically actuated arm. So basically you can change the height of the user, or the height of the seat rather, on the fly. And this allows the user to raise to eye level or social height when having conversations, which that's something that's quite important in this space. The vehicle is also multi-directional and all-terrain as well, so it's got a zero radius turning circle. It can turn around on the spot, and it can navigate things like rough ground and curbs, etc. Looking at some of the technologies that the team used, this was, we started with a blank sheet design for this particular project. So we started off with our standard concept and ideation phase. In order to communicate some of the ideas to the customer, we developed detailed concept sketches before creating outline CAD for the initial prototypes. On the top right of the screen at the minute, you can see one of the first prototypes that was developed, which proved out the overall concept, but was initially too heavy and required some handling and performance improvements. And then the final version of the first prototype in the center of the screen, which was used primarily for customer feedback and further iteration. And as I've said before, this is the version that we finished with. This is actually a manufacturing representative prototype. So everything that you can see on screen at the minute should be achievable through standard or mass production methods rather. And in order to realize this, a lot of AM techniques were used as well. So all of the panels and all of the cowlings that you can see on this particular model are 3D printed and hand finished. So this was an FDM process used to make these large panels, and a lot of the covers and cowlings and things like that as well. And then finally, just to round off with a quote from Phil. So Phil said that the devices that the AMRC produced are outstanding and prove what we've been aiming for is achievable. Victor, which was the code name for this project, is a design which doesn't ask the environment to adapt to its user. It is a mobility device which adapts to the environment around it. So yeah, this was a really successfully delivered project for the customer, and something that we're really proud to be part of. So if anyone would like to read more about those particular case studies, I'm sure the presentation files and things will be shared after today's talk, but there's some links on screen at the minute if you'd like to read more detail about any one of those case studies. And of course, if you think that, you know, AMRC could help you with the development of any new products, then please do get in touch. If you'd like to pick my brains about any of the technologies or projects that I've talked about as well, I'll be more than happy to discuss those.
Excellent, thanks very much, Joe. Yeah, really good stuff there. So now we enter the Q&A session. So I've been informed we've got until 11:10 to do this. So there's been a number of questions submitted through the chat box for our speakers. So what I would like to do is maybe just go back to the start and go through each speaker in turn and ask a few questions of each. So Julian, I'm coming to you first. So there's an interesting question coming from Kathy Bell, and I actually had this question myself, which was, what is the sort of cultural inertia? So you talk about changing culture. What's the cultural inertia? And you know, are your staff afraid of the old adage that, you know, robots will take our jobs? How is that kind of gone?
Yeah, so I think yeah, it's a great question. So thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Matt. Yeah, it is present in people's minds still, but I guess we've been honest and transparent that all the way along it's been about increasing capacity, not shifting it. So I guess to answer Kathy's question, which was how do people sort of see it coming and react to the need? Well, I think I was going to say we had the luxury of time, but it was more that our director had the luxury of foresight. So he was looking at the trends of projects coming in and requests and needs for work, and they were growing. And we've seen over the last 3-4 years that there's more reformulation work we have to do with existing products. There's more requests for new products, but our building is at capacity. So that's quite easy and very honest to say, well, we don't have any more space, but we could do with more hands. So we turned to the robot hands. But it needed time. We had to sow those seeds. It's the classic thing that people started going to the moon before 1900 because they were imagining it. And so we had to start sowing those seeds that we were going to be doing this automation journey, but we were going to involve people. And I think the way that people accepted it was that we weren't asking them what they wanted when as part of their busy life. We weren't asking them how they want the change to look. We were asking them what their current problems are and what their future problems are. And we were going away and thinking about it and coming back with a solution that we proved before we handed it off. So you don't just dump a robot or a new piece of software on someone. You work with it, you work with a small group and you collaborate and you understand where it works and where it doesn't and where its limitations are, and then you share it. And so people, the cultural acceptance, you don't have that big dip, a big rise and big dip. You temper that rise and let it just keep going up. I think would be answer Kathy's question.
Do you think there's any loss of intuition when, you know, the humans aren't directly engaged in the lab work? You know, so they're working with data more, and they're working with, you know, design of experiments and machine learning, but they're not actually handling the materials anymore. They're not necessarily watching as the materials are prepared or measured, etc. Do you think that there's a potential loss of human intuition in all of this?
Yeah, that's an interesting one as well. I think at the moment, no, and that's because we're not in this huge closed loop system yet. But I can imagine in 3-4 years' time, that's going to be something that's prescient. So at the moment, people hand the robot materials, they watch it formulating, they take the samples off and they check them before they stir them again, unless they know that it's safe. They'll take them over to other manufacturing methods, perhaps if they needed to, or when they're running on various machines, they do still check. So they're still handling their materials and handing them off. So actually the current task is avoiding the islands of automation, whereby your chemist just becomes someone who loads something up and takes something off.
Yes.
So that's more of the current concern than the complete loss of heroism. So yeah.
Yeah, so they don't become robots and the robots operating the robots.
Exactly. Yeah.
So really yeah. Okay, thanks for that. I'll move on to Dale now for a couple of questions. If I've got enough time, I'll just come back around. So the question I got for you is how do you demonstrate or quantify the value add of your system, especially if maybe you're working with a customer that has some older equipment, maybe doesn't have the connection ports. So for them to adopt your system, they'd have to maybe buy some new kit as well as the kit that you're offering. How do you kind of have that conversation?
Yeah, unfortunately, that is generally the case. We have done a few instruments. So, for example, mixers, which might be used in the food industry, that don't have RS-232 or common sport. Perhaps they're more, home products. So we have instances where we may have to try to communicate with instruments, and in this case, it's a mixer. And we simply put a spin sensor on there so that we could monitor the revolution of that and still then integrate it into the DEF platform. So there are instances where you can add instruments which don't have RS-232 connectivity or comms port, but generally speaking, any legacy equipment which has got those, we can integrate. One of the problems that we do face, though, is that a lot of the older instruments, legacy instruments, don't have their ID or serial number within the digital communications, and so that's one of the reasons why we have the ID tags. We can then assign it an individual ID which specifically specifies that instrument, even though it's got no way of taking the serial ID from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and your system is, if I'm right in thinking, is sort of agnostic to the exact nature of the instruments that you're connecting together. So you could be, you showed a wet chemistry lab there, but you could be in a pilot plant. You could be in a sort of a mechanical testing lab, or you could be in any kind of lab where you have instruments that are gathering data.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. So we've done quite a lot of other instruments. So things like mentioned earlier, the Anton Pars. We've got a range of Anton Par equipment, rheology meters, moisture analyzers, and other instruments which are connected up, and integrated into the platform. It really does depend on what the customer's looking for. And it falls into two camps, really. There are those standard laboratory instruments, balancers, stirrer, heat shakers. We're also working with a few lab reactor companies and developing the platform for lab reactors, as well as bioreactors, the wave machines and the cell spinners, roller bottle production for monoclonal antibodies, things like that. So it has a broad
and that kind of thing.
Applications.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. I'll move on to Joe now. Who's interested in time? Got 4 minutes left. So we've got a question for you, Joe. Joe Young, that is. Are you able to print materials to be used in the food production industry? So Joe Gowman mentions acetyl copolymer for food contact purposes.
If I can just jump in,
yeah.
if that's all right, Joe. Yeah. Okay. So the answer is yes, but we've got to be careful with the food industry, as I'm sure you would all agree. So it was only late last week we had a customer in looking at this exact application. So they're printing in a material called PETG and using it on a food line. And what we would recommend is that the whole system, not just the material, the whole printer system has got to be just used for that material to avoid any cross-contamination of anything in that. Now, there are additional processes you can go in, like vapor smoothing, etc., to start to then take that process forward. But what we are finding is that a lot of companies are printing the holders and the background parts, and still then using the acetal to then attach to that. So during Jo's presentation, she showed a red part which the customer has printed, a picker arm. So what the customer was doing is removing oil and grease from his line. He was printing that part to lighten the weight, but he was still using the traditional acetal for the grippers, which was food certified, to go on to that. So it's a bit of a wider subject, and it's often in a case-by-case basis, depending on where the application lies. But the answer is yes, it can be done, but it's got to be done with some consultation, and you can't just randomly print off a part and stick it on a food line.
Yeah, and a quick follow-up to that. I think I'm right in thinking that you can use 3D printing to make edible products. Is that right?
Yes,
Do
yeah,
you
you
dabble
can.
in that, or
We don't dabble in that. That's not their area we're in. No. So you can print in chocolates. In chocolate, you can print in sugar, but that's not where we're at. No.
candies and things? Yeah. Sure.
Thanks
for that. So just moving on to Joe Palmer from MRC. There was what I was wanting to ask you, Joe, was how do companies sort of interact with you on a kind of funding basis? Do you go in for grant funding? Do you take consultancy sort of fees, fee for service, that kind of thing? How do companies go about interacting with you?
Yeah, sure. So it's a whole range of things, really. Typically, these will be grant-funded projects will form, teams and consortiums of companies and apply for funding to develop something specific. But then we also have a membership model at the AMRC, so people are able to join as members and then access those services directly. Typically I would say we operate similar to other university departments. We can work directly with people, or we can go through the funding opportunity route.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. So that's 11:10. Unfortunately, no more time for questions, but I'm sure the speakers will be available on LinkedIn, or their email addresses that you would have seen in the presentations. So do feel free to reach out to them. So that just leaves me to say thanks again to all the speakers, Julian, Dale, Joe, and Kevin.